So,
How are you doing?
yeah, sorry, I'm great. How are you?
Good. You're calling from New Jersey today, right?
Yes.
Okay, the great state of New Jersey, the Garden State.
So many people are from there, from here.
So, Tommy, you're part of the residency program online, so I'm a little bit more familiar than maybe the people who are listening in on this right now. So, I would like to get a little bit of background about, how you got to where you are in terms of painting and things, because I looked at your resume on LinkedIn and I'm like, okay, fashion, sustainability, graphic design, like you're everywhere. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how you got to this point right now.
Yeah, it's almost like I'm a recovering artist because despite having drawn and painted a lot in my teenage years, which also included being a part of a studio, like a local art studio, I took classes and I taught there. I went to college, I went to the Rhode Island School of Design, and I just was sort of fascinated with the skills of designers. And so I was particularly attracted to the furniture design program just because of like I went to a show my freshman year and I just saw the physical furniture pieces that people were building, not much older than me. So I decided, yeah, I want to leave school here with these physical skills. So I worked a lot with my hands. I woodwork, I did upholstery. That's where like my design background comes in. And I was on track to sort of shift into footwear design, but then I graduated during COVID. So I had an internship lined up in my desired field, and then all of those opportunities halted. And I came back home, and the sort of industry of design halted in particular because there's a lot of work that you can't do remote, especially with product design. Like there's programs digitally, but you need to be in contact with manufacturers. Their stuff halted. So I had to pivot and I ended up doing remote graphic design work, self-taught, and I continued teaching online. But I still didn't get this fulfillment with the design, my experience in the design world. And so I went back to school. Found a master's program in Spain, and that focused in sustainable fashion. And it sort of was allowing me to return to these interests within footwear, where there's knitting technology, and in footwear you see a lot of experiments within product design. And right now the hot topic is sustainability, and there's a lot of companies like Camper that just released a shoe called Roku, which is a shoe designed without glue. And you're seeing these sort of sustainable experiments within product that show with footwear. That's where I wanted to go. And so for me, academically, sustainable fashion was like a re-entrance into that door. And I got some work experience under my belt in Spain. I finished my program. I came home, and that part of me was a little satisfied. So I took a while to figure out what I wanted to do, and I just started to like really get involved again with painting and drawing. And it was really getting back into old roots, things I put on pause. And yeah, I haven't been tempted back into the design world since I've really been pushing, um, outside of work to be an artist.
Right. And I mean, you're quite a talented artist as well. We've been witness to the development of your work and the processes of it. So it's very interesting to have a behind the scenes view into the work. And we're going to be opening up a solo show for you on Artsy very, very soon. I think in a few days, I think. I can't
Yeah, I
remember.
have about a week to get everything in.
And then, and you'll, of course, be showing in the Bureau Queer Art Volume 4 in Ventura, California. So I'd like to focus in on the work that we're going to see online and the work that you've been doing in the residency as well, because that will give people points of reference when they see your show in person or on Artsy. So we're showing a variety of different things for you. We're showing painting, drawing, like you have a huge skill set to pull from. So
Yeah, thank you. Where there's a lot to start. I guess I would start. So the series that we'll see on Artsy started as drawings, smallish, 11 by 17, and they were really quite personal and they really centered around just my experience where I'm from, which is my hometown, New Brunswick, New Jersey, in my childhood home. And because I had traveled and I had gone to school out of state, being here in Jersey, there was an initial isolation that happened, and sort of a recalibration of how it is that I live life here, because the ways I've learned to love life elsewhere don't always translate, when you move space. And then I think, this wasn't when I was making work, but I sort of moved back to the States, moved back into my childhood home. This was where I was during quarantine. And so there was maybe some of those emotions coming back up for me. And so in this work, it's exploring self-identity. It's sort of trying to find everyday joy in places that maybe would otherwise seem monotonous or banal. And I, explore that with color and just play in the space. And so I always tell people I sort of create sets, so to speak, within different places of the house, and I pose and I use photography as a method of composing, and then I embellish during my painting process. And that's a lot of the drawings. And then my shift to painting happened when there was a bit more of a like linear sense to tell a story. I think the drawings were very exploratory and playful, and I didn't know what I was saying yet. And then we get into one of the first paintings, which is me right after I shaved my head. And that felt like there was a story in mind before I started it. And so I guess because the story was clear, I felt comfortable going bigger. So that is a 16, no, excuse me, 24 by 30 painting. So I've more than doubled the scale. And then I've stuck with painting. So there's two paintings in this as we launch the collection, and then more art to come. So for me in painting, I'm leaning a lot more into reflective surfaces, things like mirrors, things like glass, things like translucency, looking through things. I think what drawing did for me, and by the way, my drawings are in color. So what drawing did for me was it really solidified this sense of a lighting that I rely on. I have these very strong light sources, and there was sort of these ideas of reflection and mirrors and self-perception trickling into drawing, but it only got more exaggerated as I go to painting because I sort of have this idea in terms of oil can be layered easily with glazing. And so, okay, there's so many opportunities to make something look reflective or wet or literally translucent because we're seeing through one layer of the paint to something behind it. And that's been really enjoyable to explore in painting.
The within that, the subject matter of your work is generally self-portraiture and inside of your home, which you sort of touched on before. Can we talk a little bit about the context of what I would say is probably like querying a space and then using that space as the set and why you are the subject of your work?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I would say, like, this me being the subject of my work, it started just from an accessibility standpoint. Like, I didn't necessarily feel comfortable asking people to spend time and pose for me when I could just sort of fill that role myself. And my drawings, I would say, feel much more iterative because it's a comfort space for me. I tend to iterate more. I might explore something very closely again and again within a series of drawings. And that's probably how fluidly I continue to be the subject of my work. And since starting this collection, I've entered a relationship with my partner, and he sat for me, and I've started to paint him and things. But it's weird that I've sort of entered this rhythm of self-portraiture now that I don't feel quite ready to abandon. Um, so I have this interest in figurative work, but yeah, there's something there. I think in general, I'm in my mid 20s, so I feel like on this journey of just self discovery and self actualization and self improvement, and the art is just an extension of that. And I love to relate to people through their stories, how I can relate to their stories, and vice versa. I can tell a personal experience, and somebody feels more connected to me. So art is an extension of that. I think that's what I'm grabbing
So,
onto.
let's go, for example, for the image of the four pane window of you reflected. Um, Tell me a little bit about like what that story is for you. What are you communicating and hoping that people will get from that particular painting?
That one I would say is the most within the whole collection. That's like my most cool. That's not the most queer, but it's the most outstanding from the rest. I think it sort of ties back to this time when I didn't have a good self perception of myself. And so I would say the painting's quite weird. I mean, we're looking at this like decrepit window pane.
Well, it's outside and everything else is the interior of your house. So
Yes, exactly, exactly. So that one's maybe more metaphorical in terms of like, there's a figure of me taking a selfie. My facial expression does not look happy. It's against this warehouse that's decrepit and abandoned. And so it is about self-perception, but we're not looking directly at the figure. We're just looking at a reflection of the figure. What we're really looking at is this, building collapsing. So I haven't put it into words eloquently yet. This is the first time trying, but it's really about, the relationship with oneself. And it's painting the most pessimistic image out of the whole series because, in general, I have built up a very confident self perception. But I've only gotten there through this rubble, sorting through rubbles of the past. So I think I'm getting more into those deep depths of the whole journey.
and then on this last week, you juxtaposed that against the painting that we're going to see in Ventura. Tell me a little bit about that painting and how it relates, because of course the first thing we noticed was the cool tone palette and the warm palette and how gorgeous they are next to each other. But I'd be interested in hearing about the content of the one we're showing in Ventura, and then why you juxtapose them together.
Yeah. And the choice to juxtapose them was a recent discovery. They weren't designed in my head to go together. I just discovered that, wow, these really speak to each other. And I think the root of that is, for me, for about a year, I got these urges to shave my head. And there's like a huge stigma against shaving your head, right? Because it's like perceived as this mental break. And I never jumped into it. I never, like, I was never impulsively jumping into it, but a part of me was like, I would just love the experience. And I genuinely, for the longest time, since about like the first 20 years of my life, have this fear of losing my hair and going bald and not having hair. I loved having long hair. And then it was a big shift to be confident enough to really think, is this something I could do? And, what if I do it and I hate it? And gradually shifting into this mindset of like, well, if I hate it, who cares? Because it's going to grow back. And if I do like it, maybe that will totally kill these anxieties I used to have. And so for me, it definitely communicates as maybe a mental break in the painting. But for me, it's actually this like achievement of confidence and a milestone for me to be able to face that fear without it compromising how I see myself. And then of course I use humor in the painting. There's the sense of shock and there's like a timing, play on timing. It's just after the shaving of that happened. So I like to see humor in that as like the celebration of all I've overcome. And then saying that out loud and juxtaposing it against the first image, it definitely can feel like, well, this is how it starts. One is where it starts. Um, the blue and that's the painting with the cool palette. And then the warm palette is the one where I'm at. It's actually a show of confidence.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't I don't get any sense of insecurity from the one where you're shaving your head. Is in a sense it when I looked at it, the first word that came to my mind was cathartic.
Hmm.
As it felt like a moment in which you make a decision to switch directions, and then you visually offer yourself a switch in order to remind yourself of that or something. I mean, that was what was going through my mind. And because in the other portraits, the reflection, you had longer, thick hair. So, and just the pile of hair in the one, two, you're just like, oh, we have to make some cancer child very happy with that.
Yeah, do we like this? Do we like this decision? Yeah, so my decision to finally shave my head came with this caveat of, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to make a painting about it. So yeah.
It's the artist way, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
And it seems like, I mean, I think some people might perceive it as a narcissism, but I honestly believe, like, to get to other people as an artist, you have to go through yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You have to either literally do that journey on a surface, or in some way in order to get to the access to be able to work with other people as well. So you can maintain that sense of depth and significance. Um, and I love I mean, I just adore the drawings that you've done and the way that you use textiles, and you have sort of a cinematographic perspective on the images that you're creating. Do you see Where do you see your work traveling in the future, in the near future?
Yeah, I would love to expand. I think I'm going to continue to work with self-portraiture, but I would love to expand the subject matter to portraiture and explore what narratives come through when other people's faces are on the page, especially because I imagine painting or drawing people with, that I have relationships with, and then, people who I've heard stories from. And that will probably, those individual stories from that person will probably really influence whatever comes out. And I'm getting like much more narrative through my paintings. I haven't drawn in about like 6 months at this point. I've been just painting. So I'm also wanting to return back to drawing and then seeing how those two inform one another. So I imagine going forward, my work will sort of be divided between smaller works that are very clean and crisp and precise, and then larger works that presumably will just get looser and looser with the paint.
How has it been for you to go from working in a studio to working in a studio and participating in a Zoom residency with a group of artists?
Yeah, it's been great to be accountable, especially because my studio is a home studio. I do work 9 to 5. I actually started working 9 to 5 during the residency, and there was all these. It's easy to slip into bad habits when something's sharing the space with where you do relax and do entertain people and all these other things. So for me, the online residency has been this unique interjection of accountability in my life.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think a lot of people, particularly, I mean, when you get outside of school, of course, you don't have that sort of bubble protection from life anymore.
Yeah.
But also, you don't have that like large table that you gather around and talk about the artwork that everybody's creating. And I think what's most interesting is the way other people reflect back the way they see the work, as opposed to maybe the perception that I would have myself. And
Mhm.
that's from the curator perspective. I'm looking at everybody's work, thinking about how it fits into the shows and everything. But just to hear how other people are seeing them as well kind of shifts the perception. So out of isolation, that's the
Yeah.
main.
This makes me want to add too, like the other surprise. I remember this looking back on having shared space with artists in college, but I think I got used to working in isolation and not relying on feedback as I'm creating something. And so like that has been wonderful. And people have commented during the residency that I'm like they notice that I receive feedback very well and implement feedback well, which I've always known that about myself, but it's like presenting for the first time for some people. But then for me, the big shock and joy and surprise was like in these later weeks, seeing how much our work is influencing one another. And there was that really interesting moment where I presented my work and then Alonso presented directly after, and the compositional like senses and devices were so similar between the two of us. And for me, it was such a delight. It's easy to see something on Instagram, feel inspired by it, but not being able, not being aware of when it's happening in the reverse because of this sort of online presence we've developed.
I really appreciate you taking the time to